Now, welcome to part 11 of my story that will, in a way, both carry on the Star Wars sequel trilogy or continue the journey of some of its characters, while also sort of rewriting or undoing the story of the sequels at the same time. Or as I like to put it, this is the story of how what comes next will change what came before. And if you're new to the story, or if you haven't seen the first several parts yet, I would highly recommend starting at part 1, and if you enjoy it, working your way back to this one. Otherwise, what is going on right now will make no sense to you whatsoever, and a link to the playlist can be found in the description below. And now, without further ado, let's get back to the story. We begin on a flat, muddy gray world, where a light rain is falling from an equally gray sky above, and where Ahsoka Tano and Sabine Wren are standing side by side, looking at the charred remains caused by laser fire of a large dragon-like creature, an expression on their faces as dreary as the world around them. "What happened here?" Sabine asks as she removes her helmet and looks to Ahsoka, not exactly expecting an answer it seems. But Ahsoka responds nonetheless with just one word: Thrawn. Sabine shakes her head and says, "Can't be. He disappeared with Ezra and hasn't been seen or heard from since. If anything, he should have still been stuck here with Ezra, right?" Ahsoka then turns from the creature and takes a few steps away before saying, "Unfortunately, I think Ezra is with him, or with him again, that he's been captured by Thrawn and the Empire." Sabine immediately scoffs and says back, "I know you've been out of it for a while, and that something's not quite right with you, that you keep saying you need to find Ezra for some reason." Ahsoka then cuts her off and says, "It's not exactly Ezra I need to find, rather it's someone who I hope is still with him, though he likely doesn't even know she is." Sabine takes a moment to try to make some sense of that, and then gives a little shake of the head before saying, "Well, anyway, according to what Hera told me, New Republic intelligence has heard nothing about Thrawn returning, or anyone else organizing what's left of the Empire. They're still scattered and divided." Ahsoka's look darkens as she says back, "And that is exactly how he'd want it to appear, until it's too late." Sabine then frowns, not knowing how to counter that. She studies Ahsoka's face for a moment then, seeing this almost lost and forlorn look upon it, and she says, "Are you okay? What exactly is wrong with you?" And to that Ahsoka shakes her head and is about to say something, when suddenly her eyes are drawn skyward to what looks like a little more than a tiny dot high in the sky. Sabine, noticing she's looking at something, follows her eyes and sees it through the lightly falling rain, and with her hand falling to her side where her blaster is, she asks, What is that?" Ahsoka doesn't answer at first. Instead, she lets the creature descend to the point where they can both make out a colorful-looking convor, or bird-like creature, that begins to circle above them, letting out happy, excited chirps and screeches. Finally, with a look of calm coming over her, Ahsoka then says, "That is the part of me that was lost." Sabine, removing her hand from the blaster, then asks, "Is that thing why you're searching for Ezra?" Ahsoka gives a single nod of the head and says, "That, and I made a promise to him, one I intend to keep." She then turns and looks at Sabine and says, "We will find Ezra, don't worry." It's then that Ahsoka holds her arm up and out, and the convor begins to immediately descend towards it. As it does, Ahsoka says, "When I left the world between worlds, I told Morai to stay with Ezra. I thought I was going back to face my end at the hands of Darth Vader, but that did not happen. Instead, I faced a whole different kind of darkness." Ahsoka then falls silent as the convor lands on her outstretched arm. She then closes her eyes, as does the convor, and Sabine can only shake her head a bit as she watches as the two apparently communicate with each other telepathically. After almost a good long minute, Ahsoka opens her eyes, as does the convor, and it takes flight once more. Ahsoka then says, "Ezra was here, and it was indeed Thrawn who captured him and did this. But there was another here, one that Thrawn has also captured." After Sabine asks who, Ahsoka continues, "A young woman from the future, who was not entirely herself. A woman who carried with her the spirit of Palpatine." Sabine immediately interrupts, "Wait, what? Who from the where now?" Ahsoka, pretty much ignoring Sabine's utterly confused look, then says, "Apparently, Ezra was able to determine that Palpatine was not fully in control of her, not yet. That a part of this young woman remained, a part of Rey, I believe her name is, part of her remains. But if Palpatine takes full control, if he eliminates what's left of her, then he will eventually be responsible for the destruction of everything. He will be responsible for a horrible calamity that will leave the galaxy in ruin." Sabine then frowns and says, "The bird told you all this?" Ahsoka, clearly realizing how this must all look to Sabine, smiles gently at her and says, "Morai is far, far more than your average bird." Sabine then comments, "Don't suppose Morai here can tell us where to find Thrawn now?" Ahsoka shakes her head no and says, "And unfortunately, if the New Republic doesn't even know Thrawn is back, that means we're going to have to get creative in finding him." "Meaning what exactly?" Sabine asks. Ahsoka thinks a bit and then answers, "If Thrawn is restoring the Empire, he must have help from somewhere, dealings with others who would like to stay off the New Republic's radar as well. We simply have to seek out someone who might be working with or for Thrawn and get them to tell us where he is." To that, Sabine gives a slight sigh and says, "Yeah, sure, really simple." That's when we're taken somewhere else in the galaxy, somewhere in deep space where we see a Star Destroyer come out of hyperspace, and then watch as it quickly falls into formation with several other Star Destroyers, perhaps a dozen in total. We're then taken onto the bridge of that first Star Destroyer, where we see Grand Admiral Thrawn looking out the large front viewport at all the other ships, a pleased expression on his face. That's when a commander quickly marches up to him, stops at his side, and she says, "Admiral, you wanted to be informed immediately if there was any sort of change of any kind with the prisoner." Thrawn inclines his head in a way as if asking the commander to explain, and so she does. "She's fallen into a deep sleep, one we cannot seem to wake her from, no matter what method we try." Thrawn's brow raises ever so slightly as if curious as he asks, "Anything else of interest regarding this, Commander?" The commander responds, "Her brain activity is unlike anything we've ever seen before. Something is happening to her, something our equipment cannot even begin to explain." Quickly then, Thrawn turns and begins to make his way off the bridge, followed closely by the commander. That's when we're momentarily taken into Rey's detention cell and see her still chained to the wall and apparently now sound asleep. There's then a flash and we move into her mind and we find ourselves on the planet Jakku in the wreckage of an AT-AT, where a younger Rey, around the age we first meet her in The Force Awakens, is etching another mark into the metal wall, signifying yet another day that she's been waiting for her family to return. And after watching Rey putz around the inside of the fallen walker for a bit, bored and alone, she hears a voice call out to her, a kind and rather elderly voice that simply says, "Rey, I've finally found you." Rey then whirls around with a beaming smile on her face as she sees an older man climb into the AT-AT, a man we recognize to be Palpatine, or what Palpatine looked like before his face had been scarred and disfigured by his own Force lightning. "Grandfather," Rey then says happily as she runs to hug him. "I knew you'd come for me. I just knew you would." After a few seconds, she pulls back from him and her smile fades as her face darkens with fear. She then says to him, "Grandfather, I've been having these horrible dreams, and in them I'm in so much pain, so much that I can't stand it anymore." Rey shakes her head fiercely. "I can't go back to those nightmares again. I won't." Palpatine then nods in a way as if he both understands and empathizes before saying, "I know, child. That's why I've been trying so hard to find you, to save you from all of that, and to help you finally get away from this place, to see to it that you are never alone again." Rey's face again lights up with a smile as she says, "Can we go now?" Palpatine nods eagerly and happily, and he says, "Of course we can. There's no reason to wait around here anymore." Palpatine extends his hand out to her, and as soon as Rey takes it, they're no longer in the AT-AT. Instead, they're now in a cold, icy, dark, and rocky world where the sky constantly flashes with lightning. Only Rey either doesn't seem to notice or care about the sudden change in scenery. She's apparently just happy to have her grandfather taking her away, taking her somewhere. And after a little while of walking across this horrid landscape, the two come to a massive cliff face of ice and dark stone, one that has a large, ominous tunnel entrance at the base of it, and that Palpatine guides Rey over towards. And once there, Rey looks into the darkness of the tunnel, and only seems slightly apprehensive when she says, "What's in there, Grandfather?" Palpatine quickly says back, "It's a place that you'll be safe, child. A place where you'll never be alone. A place where there will be no more pain. Rey then lets go of Palpatine's hand and takes a few steps towards the cave, and as she does, we see a sinister grin form on the face of Palpatine behind Rey's back. But suddenly Rey turns around and Palpatine instantly erases that smile, and she says to him, "Are you coming with me, grandfather?" But Palpatine, almost as if it pains him deeply to not be able to do so, he shakes his head and says, "I'm afraid not. There's still much for me to do elsewhere." Rey, though she looks disappointed, nods as if she understands and then turns back around and takes another couple steps towards the cave and stops at the very threshold and says over her shoulder to Palpatine, I have this strange memory stuck in my head, but it can't be a memory because I don't think it's happened yet." We then see a look on Palpatine's face, one partly annoyed and partly intrigued. He takes a few steps forward, stops next to Rey, and puts a comforting hand on her back as he says, "Tell me about it, child." It seems to take Rey a few moments to work up the courage to talk about it, as if it's something that both terrifies her and is hard to clearly remember. She then finally says, "There's something coming, isn't there? A friend of mine, I think his name was Finn, he tried to warn me about it once, about what would happen, that the galaxy itself would be destroyed, and that you'd be the one to cause it." Rey then laughs at herself, as if she knows what she's just said is something silly or ridiculous, and yet, when she turns and looks upon Palpatine once again, there is something in her eyes, something that asks him, could any of that be true? Palpatine, however, gives her a warm, grandfatherly smile and says, "Your friend was wrong, child. I'm not the one who causes it. I will be the one who is going to stop it." That's when, in the blink of an eye, Palpatine's face changes, and he again looks scarred and deformed. He then, with a hand that's already on her back, pushes Rey forward. Rey then lets out a slight yelp or scream, but as soon as she crosses the threshold of the cave, the scream is instantly cut off and all goes silent, as she seems to be swallowed up completely by the darkness. There's then a flash, and we're suddenly back in the detention cell on the Star Destroyer, and we see Rey's eyes shoot open, and standing in front of her is Grand Admiral Thrawn, and to him Rey says in a voice that is not entirely her own, "We have a lot of work ahead of us, Grand Admiral. A great deal of time has been lost." Thrawn then says, "You'll be pleased to know, my Emperor, that Ezra Bridger has been captured." Rey smiles and says, "Good. You have managed to capture the one who is my gateway into the world between worlds, to the power I need to stop what is coming." At the mention of world between worlds, there is a slight flicker on Thrawn's face, one Rey, or Palpatine, notices, and he quickly says, "Though your success comes only after first trying to kill myself and Ezra." Thrawn averts his eyes just a bit before responding, "An error on my part, one that was corrected before it became a mistake. I let my hatred for Bridger overcome me temporarily, and at first I had no way of knowing that you were inside the body of this girl. And if I'm correct, she had almost found a way to regain control." Palpatine snarls a bit and says, "I wonder, was it your hatred of Bridger or your fear of that which you do not understand, Grand Admiral, that made you act so rashly?" Thrawn doesn't answer, and Palpatine continues, "No matter, now that I no longer need her to be a figurehead, and that we are far from that place strong with the light, I have dealt with her once and for all. Rey Skywalker is no more." That's when we're taken across the galaxy again, to the inside of a ruined Jedi temple on a snowy and mountainous world, where we see Finn holding the ignited Skywalker saber and charging right at Luke Skywalker with it, who has his own green lightsaber ignited and stands ready. When Finn reaches him, he takes a big, almost wild or exaggerated swing that Luke easily blocks. Luke then says, his expression patient, "Remember, Finn, it's more about precision than power. It's more about letting the Force control you than you controlling it." Finn gives a look as if that doesn't make sense, and so Luke explains. "The Force flows through all and connects everything. It binds the galaxy together. And when it flows through those sensitive to it, those who can truly feel it, they have the choice to work with and go with that flow, to become one with the Force and serve its will as the Jedi do, or to go against that flow, to try and control and bend it to their own will. This is the way of the Sith and all who serve the dark side. Finn then nods his head as if understanding or wanting to, and then, as if trying to catch Luke off guard, he takes a few more swings at him. Though once more, as if not surprised in the least by the attack, Luke blocks with ease, but nevertheless, this time, he nods his head and says, "Better, much better, but you still have to try to reach out through the Force more, to trust in it. Let it be not only like a sixth sense, but one that you rely on even more so than the other 5. Finn again nods his head, and this time he shuts his eyes and takes a deep, calming breath in order to concentrate, but a moment later he drops the saber and almost stumbles to the ground. Luke quickly rushes forward to stabilize him and asks, "What is it? What did you feel?" Finn starts shaking his head as if trying to make sense of it all, and after picking up the saber, he takes a seat on the remains of a pillar that long since fell over in the ruined temple and says, "It was Rey. I heard her cry out in tremendous pain, and then she was suddenly silenced." Luke, looking sympathetic, takes a seat next to him and says, "I hate to have to say this, but you must learn to let her go, for now at least. You have to focus on your training. That is the best thing you can do to help her right now." But Finn quickly shakes his head and says, "Let her go? She's the reason I want to become a Jedi, to save her." Luke offers a calm, understanding smile and says, "That's not how it works though, Finn. That's not what the Jedi do." Finn shoots him a confused look and says, "What are you saying, that the Jedi don't save people?" Luke, shaking his head, quickly responds, "No, they do. They of course do. But they don't just save those they care about. That's not what it's all about. That's the opposite of what it's all about, actually. That's the path to the dark side." Finn springs to his feet and rather angrily looks down at Luke and says, "That makes no sense. How could caring about people, loving them, how could that be the path to the dark side?" Luke, clearly trying to be as gentle with his words as possible, then says, "Look at yourself, Finn. Look what's happening to you right now. Look what your concern for your friend is doing to you, how it's making you act." Finn seems to think about those words, and his anger abates just a bit before Luke continues. "Attachments are forbidden because they cause us to act based off of our feelings. Only when you are calm, at peace, will you know what is the right course of action, what must be done for the greater good." Finn seems to think about that another moment or two before shaking his head and saying, "No, I grew up in the First Order, where we were told to never ever care about anything or anyone more than the First Order itself, that we fight only for the greater good it would bring to the galaxy, and now it sounds like the Jedi Order is telling me the exact same thing." Finn, his expression now eerily calm, simply hands the lightsaber down to Luke, who, after hesitating briefly, seems to have no choice but to take it from him. Finn then says, "I won't abandon Rey. I won't do it. I can't. Because she wouldn't abandon me either, and she was also a Jedi, so make sense of that for me." Without another word, Finn turns and walks away, and when he's gone, that's when Luke hears a slow, mocking round of applause begin, followed soon after by the voice of Mara Jade as she emerges from behind one of the pillars in the room, still upright. "You know, I too could never quite figure out the whole Jedi no attachment thing." Luke, his expression mostly calm, but with perhaps a few cracks in it now, says nothing as Mara walks up to and takes a seat next to him on the broken pillar. She then continues, "It sounds oh so lonely to be a Jedi," but Luke quickly responds, "It's not at all." Mara tilts her head and gives him a curious look before saying, "Those seem like pretty hollow words coming from a Jedi with a sister and plenty of friends to love and to love him back. You do realize you're telling Finn to give up what he cares about, but you're not willing to do that yourself, are you?" Luke then responds, "The Jedi Order stood for 1,000 generations while following the code, believing in no attachments." Mara gives him a crooked grin and says, "And you know that, how exactly? Because someone along the way wrote it down in a book somewhere, or recorded it in a holocron and claimed it to be so, that it always been that way?" Luke can only offer back a weak, unsure nod of the head, and so Mara continues, "Come on, who knows what the Jedi have really been like throughout their 1,000-generation history? What beliefs have changed along the way? Because all I know is the Jedi Order, as they were during the Clone Wars and leading up to it, they were one that firmly believed in no attachments, and ironically enough, it was destroyed by a Jedi who didn't like that rule so much." It looks like Luke is about to ask her a question, but Mara cuts him off and says, "Yes, I know who you are, who you really are, or should I say, who your father really was, who and what Anakin Skywalker truly became. Luke gives her a rather impressed look, and she quickly responds to it, "Come on, I already told you who I was, where I came from, and there's a reason why I was the Emperor's hand, and it wasn't because I was an idiot who couldn't connect all the dots." Luke then looks down at the saber Finn gave back to him, the saber that once belonged to him and his father before him. "I only knew bits and pieces of my father's story," Luke begins. "His true story, of what led him to the dark side, that he hid his love for my mother from the Jedi Order, and that somehow Palpatine used that against him. He used it to turn him to the dark side." Luke then looks up and into the eyes of Mara Jade as he continues, "And what doesn't make sense to me is that it was that same love, or love for me, that brought him back, that made him turn on his Emperor and destroy him. How can love lead to both the dark and the light?" Mara basically ignores that question and instead says, Wait, you didn't destroy Palpatine. You're telling me Vader did it." Luke quickly shakes his head and says, "No, Vader didn't do it. Anakin Skywalker was the one who defeated Palpatine. But in either case, it sure wasn't me." Luke gives her a smile to the confused look and says, "You can't believe everything you see on the HoloNet." Mara, as if she can't help herself, smiles back at Luke, but quickly pushes it aside and looks away from him. And when she does, Luke again looks down at the saber and says, "Do you really think the Jedi of old were different?" Mara gives him a shrug and says, "Maybe, maybe not. But no matter what we do or don't learn about them in this place, in this temple, the only thing that matters right now is you are both the last Jedi and the first. The first of whatever you decide the Jedi are going to be from now on, that is." Luke again looks up, and the two lock eyes for a long moment. Mara then again quickly looks away and springs to her feet as she says, "And you better figure these things out pretty quickly, especially if Palpatine has really somehow returned, like Finn says." Luke's eyes then become distant, as if he's looking elsewhere through the Force. After a few seconds of this, he says, "He is, or at least something is out there, a gathering darkness that's been coming for me, I think. And there's something else, something even beyond that I can feel, or not feel." Luke shakes his head at that, especially the last part, and continues, "Either way, you're right. I have to figure all this out. I can't remain the last Jedi for much longer, or maybe I truly will be the last." He then looks up at Mara, a glimmer of hope in his eyes that Mara notices. She then shakes her head and says, Don't start thinking what I think you're thinking." She then makes a gesture to indicate everything around her. "The only reason I'm still here is because I owe it to Finn, and because I'm curious. I want to know the secrets of this place. I mean, this temple is thousands upon thousands of years old. So old, in fact, that it wasn't even in the Jedi archives that Palpatine got his hands on after the war." Luke now gets to his feet and looks like he's about to say something important, when Mara quickly says, "And speaking of all that, I should get back to helping Poe and R2 try and make sense of that database we found under the Seeing Stone chamber." Mara turns to go, and Luke again gets this look on his face like he wants to say or ask her something important, when they both hear the voice of Poe call out, "Success! Well, sort of." Luke and Mara both turn towards Poe, who is entering the chamber they're in and who is being followed closely by R2, and they just give him a look to ask what he is talking about. Poe responds, "I finally got something from the archives." R2 then lets out a quick, irritated series of beeps and whistles, and Poe says, "Sorry, we just got something from the archives." That's when Mara Jade very deliberately folds her arms and Poe corrects himself yet again. Okay, all three of us did our part, but we finally have something, though certainly not all of it yet." Luke then says, "Which is what exactly?" Poe smiles at first, but then his smile turns to a look of confusion as he begins to explain. "Well, we know what happened to the planet's orbit, why it's elongated, and why the planet spends hundreds of years at a time frozen, and only a matter of days thawed out." Mara then snaps when Poe doesn't answer quick enough, which is, why exactly? Poe blurts out, "The Jedi did it," which gets him a look from both Mara and Luke that says he needs to explain further, but Poe only shakes his head and says, "I don't know much more than that just yet, but the Jedi definitely altered the orbit. They're the ones responsible for all of this, for this frozen temple." Mara, after blinking a couple times in stunned confusion, asks, "And why exactly would they do that? Not to mention, how exactly did they do that?" Apparently ready for the question, Poe quickly answers, "By using the Force." That's when we hear Finn, who also now enters or re-enters the chamber, call out, That really can't be how the Force works. Luke then locks eyes with Finn, gives him a slight nod of the head as both a way to sort of apologize and to say, glad to see you coming back so quickly, and it's one that Finn returns. Mara then says, there is no way the Jedi could move a planet with the Force. None. That is utterly ridiculous. You're reading this information wrong. Poe, again as if expecting that sort of comment or question, quickly says back, well, apparently it took all of them, every last Jedi of the time, and then even more help. Luke then asks, what does that mean? It means, Poe begins, they used some type of technique where they draw upon the Jedi of the past, that they connect with them and use their power to help somehow. This time it's Luke who says, that's not how the Force works. But Finn chimes in, actually it is. That sounds just like the technique Rey was telling me about, the one she was trying to learn shortly before she encountered Palpatine. She learned about it in some of the books taken from the first Jedi Temple. Luke and Mara exchange a look, and it's Mara that says, how come you never mentioned before that Rey had found the first Jedi Temple? But Finn shakes his head and says, his eyes going to Luke, no, she didn't find it, it's you who does. Everyone then falls silent, and Poe takes the opportunity to speak up and say, we also learned a thing or two about that seeing stone, like what the Jedi used it for. Which is, Mara asks. Poe answers, apparently there was a war going on between the Jedi and the Sith thousands of years ago, one the Jedi weren't faring so well in. They created the Seeing Stone here and used the Kyber to essentially boost the signal strength, I guess, to reach out further and further into the galaxy than they ever could before, into the unknown regions even, to look for any potential Force-sensitive beings to train as Jedi to help in their war. But they reached out much, much further than they ever expected, to another galaxy even. Luke then responds, and what happened? What did they find? Poe then pulls a disc out of his pocket, a small hollow projector, and he says, they connected with something, or more like, as they described it, it felt like a great absence, the absence of the Force itself. For some, the experience was so powerful and intense that they nearly went mad, and they drew these images of these beings that looked just like this, Poe says, as he hits a button on the hollow projector. And that is where this part ends. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you thought of this part and what you think might happen next. So leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.